Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye, and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, "Let me take the speck out of your eye," when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye. Then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye.
So we are 4 weeks into a series that we are calling 40 Days. And what this is the 40 days from Ash Wednesday to Easter that is set aside on the Christian calendar for people to focus in intensely on their spiritual health as we journey towards the cross. It's a look inward at how are we doing? Where are we at in our journey with Jesus, with our faith, with how our faith is actually empowering us to live a different way. And so today our passage, you just heard it from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. It calls us to take a look in the mirror, a look in the mirror. I've always thought it was interesting when you go into a workout facility, how many mirrors there are. Has anybody ever noticed that? Now, to be honest with you, I've never belonged to a workout facility, so I can't say that I have a ton of experience, but I just remember the last time I was in a gym, I was actually there to play racquetball, and I was just walking through, and it was almost disturbing because, like, no matter where I was or where I was looking, there was mirrors everywhere. And I think some of that in a gym atmosphere is probably about self-absorption, as you're pumping iron, you're watching your muscles grow and you're just proud of yourself, right? But there's also this principle I think about that probably the health centers understand is that if you're going to get healthy, if you're going to be a healthy person, whether that be spiritually or physically or emotionally, part of you getting healthy is that you have a really good picture of where you're at. What is your reality? What do you really look like in the mirror? No pretending, no ignoring, self-reflection and introspection. In our passage today, Jesus is talking about judgment. He's talking about criticism. And he says, before you go on judging, before you go on criticizing, I want you to find a mirror. Everybody say that with me. Find a mirror. One of the joys of preaching is really taking a passage that is maybe has some nuance or some context, or maybe there's something in the original language that really brings it to life. And part of, or one of the real joys of preaching is taking a passage and maybe helping people to understand it, making it come alive. In fact, I meet with a group of pastors on Wednesdays, and we talk about preaching every week. And we talk about how cool is God that through the mystery of Scripture, we can stand up in front of people and proclaim something, and hopefully we can affect the world, affect lives for the positive. And this isn't because preachers are somehow more sophisticated or knowledgeable or anything, but because we take the time and focus intently on the craft of preaching. God takes our meager efforts and uses them to bring about change. And so I love the challenge of unpacking a difficult passage. Excuse me, sorry. Unfortunately, this passage doesn't require that. This passage has very little nuance. You don't have to understand the original language to understand what Jesus is trying to say here. We're in Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 5. In fact, when I was studying and researching about this passage, it was one of the least resourced passages of the New Testament that I've seen in a long time. It was almost like the commentators were saying, it says what it says. What do you want me to say? Just read it. It's right here in front of you. It's simple. Whether you interpret it 2,000 years ago or today, it's simple. And it's similar to the golden rule because Jesus knew that we would be fine if we just treat other people the way we want to be treated ourselves. It kind of reminded me of getting healthy physically. And that's kind of the theme of our series here. And when you get healthy physically, there's about 1 million books on how to do that, right? There's about 1 trillion articles on how to do that. You can join all kinds of clubs and groups and do it about 1 million different ways. But we all know something to be true about getting healthy physically is there really are some very primary elementary components. If you do those things with discipline, you'll get healthy. You'll get there. And yet there's this smorgasbord of options out there to help you on your way. But really, it's pretty simple. The basic concept is fairly simple. So my quest today is, how do we put this passage into practice? That's the real quest for us today. Not how do we understand what he's really saying, but how do we put it into practice in our life? So 3 quick ideas for us this morning. And that is, judge only to be helpful, judge after reflection, and judge measured with grace. See, Jesus makes it clear that there is a need and a value in judgment. We have to use discernment as people. And so you are going to make judgments in your life. And in fact, if you look at this passage, Jesus is even making judgments from within the passage. And he tells us, once you get it right, then you will see clearly enough to remove the speck from your brother's eye. And so there's this idea that any judgment is bad judgment, that we should all just let people live and not bother them, and there should be no truth, and everything's relative. And man, that's a slippery slope, isn't it? The call of Jesus is that there is discernment, there is truth, there is objectivity in the world, but we often get it backwards or out of order, or we do it for the wrong reasons. You remember, that's been a theme of the Sermon on the Mount, is don't just do what you're told to do, but look within your side and inside yourself and see if your motives are clear. And so, how often are our judgments and criticisms, our speaking the truth, how often are those things truly done for the benefit of the other person? And that's what I mean by judge only when it's helpful. Because there's a lot of judgment and criticizing that we do that is done for our benefit. It makes us feel better to vent it, and it makes us look better because we put one person down and in somebody else's eyes we are elevated. Or even some of our judgments and criticisms is so that somebody would change their behavior so that it wouldn't hurt us so much. It'd make our lives better. I was thinking about the times that I'm most judgmental this week. And I really figured out that the times I'm most critical in my life, you can really identify those or classify those things into 2 categories. And they both have to do with pride. It's both pride. But one is, I criticize people when subconsciously I think I can do better. Now, most of us aren't arrogant people. We don't walk up to somebody and say, I can do better than that, and then tell them what for. Most of us are more decent than that. We've learned that won't get you very far in life. But a lot of our criticism, if you look deep enough, what's behind it is you think you can do better. You think you can do better. I think about the times when a lot of times I'll criticize my kids, and I think about how what's behind that is this hope that they would do better, but deeper than that, there's this unhealthy thing where I feel like I can do better. I'm trying to pull them up to my level in some way. And the second category that I could qualify most of my critique or judgment in is that I feel like I'm owed more. I feel like I'm not getting what I really deserve in this moment. Like, has anybody noticed since COVID that when you go out to eat, things usually take a little bit longer, and restaurants are short-staffed, and the service industry is trying to recover from COVID and get back on its feet? And so a lot of times we'll sit in there and we'll be critical about how things are run or how things are managed. And what really lies at the bottom of that is that we feel like we're the customer. We're paying for this. We're owed more than this, right? We're critical because we're owed more. I thought about this just yesterday. Brigham, who's my 4-year-old boy, he started playing soccer for the first time. And we signed him up in a soccer league. He's 4. We signed him up in a 6U league. and he had his first game on Saturday, which was a lot of fun. But what wasn't fun was that he was playing against 7-year-olds. And there was 7 and 8-year-olds. And I found myself as we were leaving that soccer complex talking to Carolee, and I wasn't angry or anything, but I was criticizing the way that the league was run and how they communicated. And why was I criticizing them? Because I felt like I was owed more. I paid for that league. I put my son in that league. I gave my time. I feel like they should have done better. And honestly, what's behind that is there's this thought that I feel like I could have solved that problem and done better. How arrogant, right? How prideful. Because here's the truth. About the time you start thinking that, you realize that, oh man, I'm a pastor. I'm a leader of people. I help lead an organization. And there are deficiencies in our organization. And there are times when you come to church and you are, if nothing else, inwardly critical of how things are going on here. Of course you are, because none of us are perfect and we're trying to put it together. So the key in figuring out if I'm going to judge and be critical of somebody is it actually helpful? Does it actually benefit the other person? You see, when I criticize and judge from a place of pride, it is about improving my circumstances. It's about making my life better, improving my own standing. It's not about the other person. It's very rarely about them. Yet Jesus is clear, judge as you want to be judged. And if you're like me, the only criticism I want is constructive criticism, right? I don't want complainers. And the criticism that I'm most open to hearing is from the people that are closest to me. There are some people that are so close relationally and they have earned my trust that they could come up to me and tell me anything and I would listen to them because we are in relationship with each other. We've earned trust. I know that they want what's best for me. But a lot of people throw criticism like this over a wall and then they duck. And there's no relational connection, right? These are just bombs that we launch on people. The further you are from the person, the less you should judge them. If you find yourself being overly critical of somebody, take a step to relationally draw closer to them. That's the solution. Relationship is the key. Investment, long-term benefit is what we are after. See, Jesus was criticizing the hypocrites in this passage, which most people think were the Pharisees. And the Pharisees judged other people to prop themselves up and make themselves look better. But a follower of Jesus, what they're known for is that they judge themselves first in order that their judgment may benefit the other person. So we judge only when it helps the other person. Second, we judge after reflection. Look at verses 3-5 here. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? I kind of hear Jesus saying this with a little bit of attitude, right? It's almost humorous. It almost sarcastic. How can you say to your brother, here, let me take that speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. First, take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Before you offer help, get help. I was thinking about this week. Just this week, as some of you know, I've been struggling with some illnesses, but this week I got something stuck in my eye. Has anybody ever had something stuck in your eye? Oh, isn't that bad? It hurts, and then you got to try to figure out how to get it out. And then Knox was taking some eye drops. Knox is our middle boy. He's 7 years old, and he was taking some eye drops, and he was laying back on the couch, and we were trying to convince him that it wasn't going to hurt like it does at the eye doctor, and to keep his eyes open. And if you've ever done that with a kid, you know, they're trying their best, and you're trying to pull their eyes open. But here's what it made me think. The eyes are so sensitive. They're so sensitive. Just a little piece of something in your eye can ruin your whole day. So here's the truth for us. If somebody else is going to mess with my eye, I want them to understand what it feels like. I want them to know how sensitive the eye really is. And if they've had their own eye procedure done before, if they've had somebody else's finger in their eye, then I'm more likely to trust them to be sensitive to my eye because they understand the pain. And this is called humility. When you've been there and you've processed that pain before. And reflection is a must, because here's what I've realized about myself, and I'm guessing it might be true about you, is that I'm most often critical of attitudes and behaviors and words and actions in other people when they are exhibiting a trait that I don't like about myself. Anybody else? Getting a little personal here, right? I'm quicker to judge something in somebody else, to criticize something in somebody else when I despise that action in myself. I do this as a father. I don't know if any of you do this with your family too, because a lot of us think we're not as much like our family as we think we are, but then we really are. But I just remember watching my brother and sister parent before I became a parent, and I sure thought it was a lot easier than it is now. It's so fun to give parenting advice when you don't have kids, right? But here's what I came to realize. The things I disliked about other parents were often the things that I most disliked about my own parenting. The things I was most critical were things that I did myself. And maybe that's why Jesus uses this word picture here of a beam and sawdust. If you look at this picture here, you have a person cutting a beam, a log, and it's making sawdust. And I wonder if Jesus did this intentionally to say, you're looking at somebody's eye, recognizing this little speck of sawdust, but the larger, more complete image of that thing that you despise is sitting in your own eye. The things we criticize in others is merely a small particle of the same thing that's sticking out of our own eyes. So here's my challenge for you and me today. What if we just tracked our critical words? Preparing for this sermon this week caused me to do that. What if we just paid attention and noted how often we are critical? And for every critical word spoken, instead of putting a quarter in a jar, for every critical word spoken, we commit to one another that we will offer one personal confession where we've fallen short, or we'll commit to 1 minute of self-reflection, asking the Lord to show us where maybe that very thing we criticized is evident in our own life. What if we made this really practical? As spouses, maybe we can help each other with this, right? We can say, hey, you're being critical. Go to your room 1 minute in front of the mirror, right? Okay, don't do that. Don't do that. This is a self-directed exercise, okay? But here's my theory. Most of us don't even know how often we're being critical. It's just become habitual. It's been part of our nature. We don't recognize the pride that sits underneath that. So what if we started listening to ourselves, like me in my minivan after a soccer game, and said, oh man, it's so easy to be critical. But here's the places where I need grace. So, judge after reflection. Lastly, we want to judge measured with grace. Look at verse 2. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. You ever sit in elementary school class, maybe middle school class, and you just taken a quiz of some sort, and the teacher says, okay, self-grading, pass your test to the person sitting across from you. Anybody remember that? Or was that just me? Okay, good. Isn't it interesting how your grading technique changes when the person you're grading has your paper? You know, as a spelling test, I can't tell if that was an I or a J, but I'm hoping to receive the same grace over there that I'm giving them. I'm gonna count it as an I. Yeah, that one's good, right? There's something about measuring or judging something in a way in which you want to be judged. If you know that person next to you has your paper, you're tending to give more grace in hopes for return measure. Jesus tells this really eye-opening story in Matthew chapter 18. It's a really hard story. It's a story, of the unmerciful servant. And here's the nature of the story is there's this king who has been really, really, really kind to this one individual. In fact, has loaned them over a year's worth of wages. And now it's time to pay up. And the servant comes before the king, and the servant can't pay the king back this huge amount of money. And so the law says that the family should be sold and the man should be jailed and everything should be given to the king. But what Jesus does, or when Jesus tells the story, what the king does instead is he says, I'm going to forgive your debts and you are free to go. Just this unbelievable amount of generosity. And then Jesus in his story, he continues on and he says, that person who was just forgiven all those debts left that place, and as he did, he met somebody who owed him about $10. And that person couldn't give him $10. And so what they did is they had him prosecuted to the full extent. You owed me $10, you couldn't give me $10, that's my $10. Off with you and your family. And the king gets word of this. And he calls the man back in and says, didn't I just forgive you over a year's worth of wages? And now you just cause judgment, or you just place judgment on this person for the full extent of mere change? And at the end of that story, verse 32, verse 33, the master calls the servant in and says, you wicked servant, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? And that's the challenge for us today. Your point of reference for the grace that other people deserve from you should be the grace you have received from God. Your measuring stick for the grace other people deserve from you should be the same measuring stick that God uses in doling out his grace to you. Can you imagine a teacher who goes in front of the principal for yearly review and they've been substandard the whole year? Excuse after excuse after excuse, failing metrics, and the principal says, you know what? I believe in you. I'm going to give you another year. I'm going to work with you. Let's see if we can pull that out. The teacher says, oh my, thank you. And goes into the classroom and starts grading papers and starts unloading on the kids in the classroom who just can't seem to get it together and life's working against them, and they just berate them for being unable to meet the standard. Can you imagine the hypocrisy? Yet we often as the church come to the feet of Jesus desperate for forgiveness, and then we proceed out the door of the church to bring law and order and justice and to set people right and tell them where they're wrong and to cast judgment and make critical statements and to persecute those who have failed us. And Jesus is saying, whoa, whoa, whoa. We're a people of grace. The grace that's been given to you. Offer to them. Jesus says, remember the measure of grace that you've been given. Think upon the measure of grace you want to be given and make your judgments measured. with grace. As Linda comes this morning, today we come to the table of the Lord. We come to a moment of communion, and we do it very specifically to remember the measure of grace that's been extended to us. In these elements, we remember that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And last week we were focused on feasting on God's grace so that we wouldn't feel pressure to earn our status, to earn our way towards the Lord, to earn our keep in other people's mind. So God's grace made it so that we wouldn't keep striving to earn his favor. But this week we come to the table of God and feast on his grace to help us measure grace accordingly to other people. You see, until we've experienced the introspection and the confession and the grace wash over us, we got to be really careful about going into the world making judgments and criticisms. But when Jesus has saved you from your sin, when you have repented and confessed, when you've come to this place of laying yourself bare before the Lord and realizing how unworthy you are and letting God's grace wash over you, all of a sudden you enter the world a new person. You enter the world hungry to come alongside people, and in your judgment and criticism, you do it for their benefit. And you do it full of grace. Like working on somebody else's eye, knowing the sensitivity, a careful touch that honors their place. Lord, it's so easy to project our own dissatisfaction with ourselves onto other people, to project our own pain and discomfort and other people's criticisms of us and just to redirect them onto other people. It's so easy to get caught up in how other people are failing and forget that we have a log in our own eye. And so would you help us to take the challenge this week to listen closely for the ways we are being critical, and to pause and confess in that moment, to reflect in that moment. Lord, would you make us more committed to when we judge, that we would be about the betterment of the other person, that we'd want to help them succeed. And God, would you make us a people who are known for our grace, known for your Spirit inside of us, we pray in your name. Amen. Amen.